Or am I, despite all my efforts, just another tool that will complete the cursed cycle of blood? I never imagined that one day I would stand before myself in such a strange way, as if confronting a ghost emerging from the depths of a past I hadn't personally experienced, yet one that ran through my blood like poison. I stood trembling in the basement, where no one could hear or see me, except for the damp walls stained with the traces of mold and time. In front of me stood the black mirror I had inherited from my father, the one that had remained locked for decades, covered by a heavy iron cover that could only be removed if certain conditions of forbidden rituals were fulfilled. I had long known that this mirror was more than just an old ornament or an ordinary heirloom. I had been warned repeatedly not to touch it, but the whispers that had haunted me for weeks would not leave me. The voices grew louder in my head each night, until I could hear them as if they were the beating of my own heart. "Open the mirror, we are waiting for you, your blood knows the way." I hesitated a lot. I told myself I was no longer that wizard greedy for power, and that I was capable of breaking the old shackles. But curiosity was like a drug running through my mind, pulling me step by step toward my destiny. I prepared the room for the ritual. I turned off all the lights, leaving only 2 candles whose flames danced on the basement walls, casting broken shadows like spirits moving around me. I placed the mirror in the middle of the floor and sat in front of it, muttering the few remaining incantations I remembered from my father's recollections. My hands were trembling, but I still grasped the cold iron cover and slowly lifted it. The moment the mirror's surface was revealed, I felt the ground beneath my feet shake. A wave of heavy air swept through the space, an air with a foul odor, a mixture of mold and old blood. The mirror's surface was no longer solid. It began to swirl like black water stirred by a hidden wind. I stared at it in astonishment until the outlines of a face appeared, mine, but its eyes weren't mine. That face looked at me coldly, then said in a deep, crackling voice, as if emerging from the chests of hundreds of beings. "Finally, you've broken the barrier, opened the gate. How long we've waited for this moment." I took a step back, my heart nearly bursting out of my ribs. I asked in a broken voice, Who are you? And why do you resemble me?" He smiled a cold smile, a smile devoid of any trace of humanity, and said, "I am nothing but your true reflection, the shadow left in this mirror by the sins of your ancestors. We are the other face of your family, the demons who fed your strength in exchange for your souls. You are nothing but an extension of a chain of dark covenants." His words fell upon me like a thunderbolt. I thought I had chosen this path of my own volition, but the truth seemed clearer. What I was experiencing was not a personal destiny but an inherited blood curse. I tried to scream, to break the mirror in his face, but my body wouldn't obey me. My hands froze as if they were bound by invisible chains. The entity continued from within the glass. "Every time you try to escape, you'll come back to us. We're in your blood, and you're in ours. There's no salvation without a price, and the price is greater than you can imagine." Then the room began to spin around me, as if the walls were collapsing inward. Both candles went out at once, and I was plunged into pitch darkness. All that remained before me was his eyes, shining from within the glass, red like embers. His voice was no longer a single one, but dozens of overlapping whispers, some laughing, some screaming, some reciting incantations I couldn't understand. Soon you'll know, the repentance you seek is not salvation, it's a new door to the abyss." Suddenly, a cold hand extended from within the liquid surface of the mirror, a hand just like mine, only thinner and stained with blood. It tried to grab me, to pull me back inside. I screamed with all the strength left in my throat and threw the mirror away. It fell to the ground and shattered, or so I thought. When I approached, I found no shards. It was as if the mirror had evaporated into thin air. All that remained was the scent of ash and blood. I sat on the ground, panting, my heart pounding violently in my chest until I thought it would explode. At that moment, I realized that I was no longer haunted by voices alone. nor by fleeting nightmares. I had broken the barrier and unleashed what had been trapped deep within the mirror. Now, the demons no longer came to me in strange forms, but rather, they wore my own face. Night had fallen over the entire village, and it seemed as if the sky itself had turned into a black shroud covering the earth. The silence of the night was unusual. It was heavy, suffocating, as if the air were filled with secrets no one dared to reveal. I sat alone in my room, contemplating the slowly melting candle, watching the fire bend with every breath the darkness around me exhaled. I felt that the candle was not just a piece of melting wax, but another life being extinguished before me, and every drop of wax that fell reminded me that time was stealing me mercilessly. I am Rook, the last heir to a cursed lineage. Since childhood, I have heard whispers echoing in my head, voices that no one else could hear. I used to think they were mere illusions, remnants of my grandfather's stories about witches and ancient covenants, but now I realize that those voices were nothing but calls from another world, a dark world waiting to emerge. I'd always believed I was in control of my life, that I was the ultimate master, but over time, I discovered the terrifying truth. I was nothing but a small puppet, moved by invisible strings, guided by those who dwell in the darkness. That night, I was visited by a nightmare unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I found myself standing in a huge hall, its walls made of black stone bleeding, from which words flowed in a language I'd never seen before, but somehow understood. In the middle of the hall sat a man who looked exactly like me, a carbon copy of my features, but his eyes burned a hellish red. When he spoke, I heard his voice emerge, but it was tinged with evil, as if a dark shadow had occupied my throat. Haven't you realized yet? I'm you. I'm the face you tried to hide from yourself, the part you buried alive, but it kept waiting for this moment to return. My legs trembled, and I tried to scream, but he beat me to it with a cold smile. Every word he spoke pierced my soul like knives. I felt as if I were standing before a mirror revealing what I didn't want to see, a mirror reflecting my filthiest secrets and the sins of my ancestors. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my room as I'd expected. I was in a long, dark basement, its walls smelling of incense mixed with decay. There, a dark figure appeared before me, its body changing every moment, sometimes taking on the face of my father, sometimes my grandfather, sometimes my own. Its wings were enormous, covering the ceiling, and its eyes were two embers illuminating the darkness. It extended a long, black hand, its fingers like claws, and pointed at me, saying, "The time has come, Rock. You are not just a passing magician, you are the chosen one to fulfill an ancient covenant. Your blood binds us, and your soul is the key to our gates. Do not try to escape, escape is not meant for the likes of you." My whole body trembled, and I tried to retreat, but the ground itself betrayed me. From beneath it emerged black chains, alive like snakes, which coiled around my feet and hands, tightening their grip on me. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "I will not be your slave. I am not a puppet in your kingdom." The authority laughed so loudly that the walls of the crypt shook, a laugh that was not human. It drew closer, so close that I could feel its cold breath burning my face, and whispered, "You have been our slave since birth, and your blood is the unbreakable covenant. Whoever dares to break the covenant, will pay with their mind and soul." Suddenly, more voices began to rise from every direction. Many voices, overlapping, like a chorus of ghosts. The voices of all my ancestors, all merging into one recurring sentence. "Escape if you can, but you will not escape, you will not escape." I felt the whole place crumble around me. The walls of the crypt began to crack, blood dripped from the graffiti, and the floor shook. In a fleeting moment, everything went dark. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my room. The candle was still burning, but its duration was much shorter, as if many hours had passed. I sat panting, sweat dripping from my forehead. I wondered in astonishment, was what I had experienced a dream? Or had I truly crossed into another world beyond the bounds of time? That night, I realized the truth I had been running away from. I am not just a member of an ordinary family. I am the son of an ancient covenant, an era of blood and darkness. If I didn't discover its secrets, would surely be swallowed up. But the problem was that every step toward knowledge pushed me deeper into the maze, and every door I opened only led me to another, more terrifying door. I was walking an endlessly dark path, and every time I thought I was getting closer to the truth, I discovered that the truth itself was merely a mask concealing an even more terrifying face. I never imagined I'd sink so deeply into the darkness. I thought I'd glimpsed all the cruelty and brutality the demonic world could hold, but what I experienced was only the beginning of a journey longer than I imagined, one fraught with endless nightmares. I sat alone in my old room, the room I inherited from my grandparents, which since childhood had made me feel uneasy. The walls were cracked, damp crept between the corners, and the stench of mold clung to my nostrils like an inextinguishable curse. Frayed ropes hung from the ceiling, as if waiting for a neck to wrap around them. On the opposite wall sat an old, broken mirror, half of it reflecting my fading image, the other half sinking into a bottomless black depth. The mirror wasn't just glass, I felt it as if it were an eye watching me, a window open to another world. I stared at it for a long time, seeing strange movements in the blackness, writhing shadows, and faces whose features changed with frightening rapidity. Sometimes she smiles sarcastically, and sometimes she whispers whispers I can't understand, but they pierce my ears and settle in my heart. On that fateful night, I took hesitant steps toward the mirror. I didn't know why, but something was pushing me, an invisible force pulling me like a drowning person pulls air. As I drew closer, a strange voice began to penetrate my hearing, many overlapping whispers, as if dozens of mouths were speaking at once. I didn't understand all the words, but the meaning was clear, imbued with both promise and threat. Your true power has yet to begin. If you want immortality, we are the way. My limbs trembled, and I suddenly remembered the words of my grandfather, the man who died repeating his warnings. Don't stare too long into the mirror, Rock. It's not just glass, it's an open door. I had laughed at his words that day, dismissing them as mere old wives' tales, but at that moment I understood that my grandfather wasn't crazy. He knew the truth. I hesitated for a few seconds, but I didn't resist. Something inside me urged me to reach out. As soon as I touched the mirror's surface, I realized the true horror. I didn't feel the coldness of the glass, but the warmth of a pulsating body, as if I had placed my hand on a living being. Suddenly, a long black arm emerged from the blackness, wrapped itself around my wrist with iron strength, and violently pulled me inside. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone, swallowed by a bottomless abyss. I fell into a place I'd never seen before, cracked earth, from which suffocating fumes burned my lungs, and the sky was covered in a thick fog, within which a faint red glow shone, like embers burning above me. In the shadows, small, repulsive creatures moved, with eyes glowing like fire and mouths full of sharp teeth. They sprinted among the rocks at terrifying speed, and when one of them came close, it muttered in a hoarse, broken voice. At last, the heir of the blood has come. We've waited so long for you. I stepped back, but the earth itself seemed to be trying to swallow me. Suddenly, out of the fog, a massive being appeared. His black wings stretched like clouds, and his face was distorted, a mixture of human and monstrous features. He changed every second. Sometimes he looked like my father, sometimes my grandfather, sometimes me. He raised his hand, and the air around me froze, even my breath stopping in my chest. Then he spoke in a deep voice that shook the ground beneath him. Rock. Don't try to escape. You were born to fulfill the covenant. Your blood is sealed with our promises, and your soul is the last key to our survival. I felt my whole body tremble, and a chill pierced my bones. I wanted to scream and deny it, but something inside me, a dark part one wasn't aware of, whispered, "You know this is your destiny. You know there's no escape." I felt another, harsher hand touch my left wrist. I looked up, and another black arm had left a burning black mark on my skin. The pain was unbearable, but it wasn't just physical pain, it was a sense of belonging, as if something inside me was awakening. Suddenly, as if I'd awakened from a coma, I found myself on the floor of my room, next to the shattered mirror. My chest rose and fell as if I'd run long distances, and on my wrist remained a clear mark, a black fingerprint, like a hand that hadn't yet been erased. At that moment, I realized I was no longer just a human being venturing closer to the world of demons. I was no longer trapped between them and my reality. Rather, I had become, without realizing it, a part of them, and the mirror was only the beginning of the journey. I was no longer the same man after everything I'd experienced. I would wake up during long nights as if emerging from a dark abyss. I didn't know if I'd truly slept or if I'd been lost in other worlds unseen by anyone but myself. I could hear their whispers even in the silence of the day, as if the demons I'd inherited from my family were no longer content with the night, but had invaded my every moment, haunting me even when I was awake. I walked the streets like any other person, but my shadow didn't move like a human shadow. Sometimes it lagged behind, other times it preceded me. In the eyes of passers-by, I was just an ordinary person, but I knew I was no longer that. Something in my blood had changed, something that drew the breath of darkness to me. In that chapter of my life, I began to discover that the knowledge I possessed was only a small part of a boundless sea. My grandfather and father always hid papers and books from me that I was never allowed to touch. I thought I had inherited their entire legacy of magic and curses, but the truth was more sinister and horrific than I expected. One evening, as I crept into the basement I had long been forbidden from entering, I found a battered wooden box surrounded by symbols engraved on the floor. Just looking at them made me feel a pang in my chest and a desire to retreat, but my curiosity was stronger than any fear. I opened the box with a trembling hand and found ancient manuscripts written in a language I didn't fully understand, but which was similar to spells I had used in the past. On one of the pages was a strange drawing of overlapping circles, with tearful human eyes in the middle. When I touched the black ink with which it was drawn, I felt a warmth running through my fingers, as if the ink was still alive. Suddenly, I heard a voice echo behind me. It wasn't my father's or my grandfather's, but something else, something inhuman. "You finally opened the door," the voice said in a language I hadn't learned, yet I understood clearly. I turned around in panic, seeing nothing but darkness. But the darkness seemed to breathe. Little by little, from the shadows, blazing red eyes emerged, observing me like a hunter observing his prey. At that moment, I realized that the demons I'd been dealing with all my life were merely intermediaries, mere servants of a greater voice, of a presence far darker than I'd ever imagined. I found myself unconsciously asking, "Who are you? And why are you talking to me now?" The reply came in a whisper, getting closer and closer until I felt it emerging from within me. "I am the origin of the lineage, I am the one from the first pact with your distant ancestor. You are nothing but vessels, and now you are the chosen one." My limbs trembled, and a terrible weight weighed heavily on my chest. I tried to scream, to deny, but something inside me believed it. I remembered all the strange signs of my childhood, my father's silent stares when I asked embarrassing questions, my grandfather's trembling hand as he wrote names in the sand, dreams filled with shadows whispering secrets I didn't understand. But what added to my terror was that when I returned to the manuscripts, I found my name written there, engraved in ancient ink, among dozens of names belonging to my ancestors. It was as if a curse had been waiting for me since birth, waiting for the moment I would open that box. That night, I realized that I was not just a magician continuing his family's tradition, but rather a link in a dark chain that had begun centuries before. I had a choice to make, either surrender and become a tool for this unknown entity, or find a way to salvation. But what salvation? How could the heir of demons be freed from the poisoned blood that ran through his veins? From that night on, every day became a battle, between an overwhelming will that drove me to continue on the path, and a weak ray within me that cried out for salvation. I knew the next chapter of my life would be more dangerous than the last, because I was no longer facing just scattered demons, but the root of evil itself. Night wasn't much different from day in my world. Both melted into a thick, inextinguishable blackness that enveloped my heart like smoke around a blazing fire deep in a dark cave. Even daylight seemed dim, as if the sun had lost its power as it approached our home. I thought I'd reached the limit of my knowledge of demons and the cursed covenant that had bound my family for centuries, but what unfolded before me those days shattered every certainty I'd built and turned my balance upside down. I was sitting in my grandfather's old room, the room I'd always avoided as a child because of its strange smell, a mixture of musty walls and the scent of burning incense. The floor creaked disturbingly with every step, and the walls were cracked as if they held secrets they could no longer conceal. As I contemplated the dust accumulating on the bookshelves, I noticed a small gap in the wall near the wooden bed. I pushed a worn stone, and a dark cavity opened before me. Inside was a small wooden box, covered in a thick layer of dirt, as if it had been hiding for centuries, waiting for this moment. I grasped the box with trembling hands and slowly opened it. A heavy dust rose from it, making my chest constrict, as if the air itself refused to enter my lungs. Inside, I found a dark leather notebook with a cracked cover, dotted with strange symbols engraved in faint red lines. They glowed for a moment before my gaze, as if they had been written in blood and had never dried. I hesitated before touching it, but my curiosity was stronger than my terror. I extended my fingers, and as soon as I touched the first page, I felt a heat flow from my fingertips into my veins. It was an unfamiliar heat, like a living, pulsating current. I began to read, and the words pierced my mind like poisoned needles. They weren't just lines, they were written whispers, seeping into my soul with every letter. Through it, I learned that the demons I believed served my family weren't servants at all, but prisoners. My father and grandfather weren't the masters I'd thought, but jailers, shackling those damned souls through rituals and blood, in exchange for false loyalty. But the biggest shock came when I turned the next pages. There was a secret I hadn't even dared to imagine. In every generation, there is a blood sacrifice, a victim offered to keep the chain strong. My grandfather sacrificed his older brother, and my father sacrificed a relative who vanished without a trace. I suddenly felt a sharp chill run through my veins, as if the words had pounced on me, devouring me alive. Then came the whisper, a whisper coming not from my mouth or the room, but from the void itself. "Rock, you're next." My limbs froze, and my eyes widened until I felt my eyelids tearing apart. On the wall in front of me, a black shadow began to form, featureless, a blurry, yet eerily familiar. The closer it got, the more I felt the air around me grow heavier, as if the room were turning into a sealed tomb. "You are just another link in the chain," the voice said, its voice echoing inside my skull, not my ears. "Your blood is the price to pay. If you don't pay, the chains will break, and we will spread everywhere." I tried to scream, but my voice was choked in my throat. I tried to run, but my feet froze as if the ground had held me in its grip. I could only stare at the shadow as it slowly expanded, engulfing the wall, then the ceiling, then the walls, until I felt myself drowning in an endless entity. I pushed myself staggering out, the notebook still clutched in my hand, like someone bearing an unshakable curse. I knew my life was no longer my own, and the blood coursing through my veins had become the signature of a covenant I had never chosen. Yet, amidst the terror that tore me apart, something else stirred within me, a burning desire to know everything, to uncover what my grandfather, my father, and everyone who came before me had kept hidden. I knew I was walking on the edge of an abyss, and that any wrong move could drive me to madness or death. Yet, I couldn't back down. I had to face the whole truth, no matter the cost. I thought I'd reached the ultimate limits of madness, but I was wrong. The truth was farther and deeper than I'd imagined. The night wasn't an ordinary night. It was more like a sea without shores, swallowing me up every time I thought I'd found my way to shore. I sat in my old room, alone, besieged by the echoes of memories I couldn't expel. In front of me was the black mirror, the mirror I'd inherited from my father, the one he'd warned me about throughout his life. I'd thought it was just a strange tool of sorcery, an artifact that had lost its value over time, but I realized too late that it was nothing more than a window. A window into a world I shouldn't have seen. I extended my trembling hand to its cold surface, and darkness swallowed my reflection, revealing another face, mine, but distorted. His eyes burned like two embers, and his slanted smile dripped with malice. He raised his head slightly and said in my same voice, "Rock, you've been too late. You've always been half dead. It's time for me to complete you." My lips trembled, but curiosity was stronger than my fear. I whispered, "Who are you?" He laughed so loudly that the glass shook and said, "I am you," without restraint. "I am the blood you inherited, the shadow that has watched you since birth. You've tried to suppress me, but you can't escape me." Suddenly, the mirror began to shake like a basin of water, and strange sounds echoed from its depths, overlapping voices, hundreds, even thousands, of whispers. A dark choir chanted incantations that I couldn't understand, but whose echo pierced my bones. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the room around me disappeared. I found myself standing in a vast hall, its floor made of hot ash that stung my feet, its walls breathing like a living body. The ceiling was lost in endless darkness. In the center of the hall rose a massive black throne, wrapped around it in massive chains resembling metal snakes, each link pulsing with a deep red light. Surrounding the throne were dozens of beings resembling neither humans nor animals, faces that shifted every second, eyes that glowed in the darkness, bodies that twisted and melted like smoke. A massive being shrouded in a thick black fog sat on the throne. I couldn't see his features clearly, but his presence was enough to paralyze my will. His voice, when he spoke, was like thunder, striking directly at my chest. "Finally, you've come, son of the lineage. You've been waited for so long." I froze, trembling like a lost child, my heart pounding violently, nearly tearing my ribs apart. I didn't dare reply, but the being continued. "Your blood is too precious to be wasted. You bear the seal, and the seal is indelible." He pointed, and the creatures surrounded me, swirling rapidly, their voices mingling into a storm of screams, laughter, and whispers. I tried to scream, "No! I won't be anyone's slave. I'm tired of these chains." But his voice laughed, a laugh that shook the ground beneath my feet. He said, "You will not choose. Blood chose you long ago. You are the last link, and if you break it, everything in these chains will be freed, and your world will be plunged into darkness." I screamed with all my might, and suddenly darkness swallowed me. I woke up lying on the floor of my room, the mirror in front of me cracking from the inside as if it would explode. My entire body was drenched in sweat, but the most terrifying thing was what I saw on my hands, strange engravings, etched into my skin as if they had been branded with an inextinguishable fire. I frantically tried to wipe them away, but they wouldn't disappear. Instead, they glowed redder every time I touched them. I realized then that what had happened was no dream. I emerged from that night marked, the mark of the beginning of a new phase, more horrific than anything that had come before. And ever since that night, I have never slept peacefully. Every time I close my eyes, I hear whispers calling to me, see the throne again, and feel the ground shake beneath my feet, as if the entire world were pushing me toward a fate I had not chosen, a dark fate that eagerly awaited me.